Welcome to the SIFMA AMG and ISDA webinar regarding automating the release process for collateral in segregated accounts at third-party custodians. I'm Amy Caruso, Head of Collateral Initiatives at ISDA, and along with my counterpart, Elisa Newton-Yarve, Vice President at SIFMA AMG, we welcome all of our members and an extended audience to this webinar. And for our members, we will have this session recorded and sent along via email probably later this week, maybe early next week. Now, before we begin with our content, we'd like to open with a few housekeeping items. First, we opened the session to everyone. We put it on social media. We all advertised it as much as we could. And because of that, we may have some press attending, maybe not. And with that, we'd like to follow Chatham House rules. As a reminder, with Chatham House rules, participants are free to use information received, but neither the identity nor the affiliation of the speaker or speakers, nor that of any other participant may be revealed. And if you are from the press and you'd like to have a more formal interview, please contact Elisa or me via email or LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to set that up. Now, also, we welcome your questions. We want to get you all very involved in this process. So please use the chat functionality on your screen. I'll monitor the questions throughout our session and try to work them in. And we also have a section at the end just for questions. If any of your questions are very specific to your firm, or if we run out of time, I will get back to you. Don't you worry. Now, today we will review what the industry challenge is with the collateral release process. Why now is more critical than ever for this problem to be solved, and we'll explore some solutions to automate the process, which can reduce operational liquidity and counterparty risks. I'd like to take note that SIFMA, AMG, and ISDA, we don't recommend nor endorse any vendor or commercial opportunity or solution, but we do appreciate that our panelists today may be sharing some of their specific experiences as examples that can be implemented. And we have a number of passionate and well-versed experts to join the session today. We have Jason Brazil, Vice President from State Street, and he's also a board member of the International Securities Association for Institutional Trade Communication. We call that ISDA for short. We also have Mark Persiani, Director of Investment Operations from BlackRock, John Montgomery, Senior Specialist of Global Derivatives and Collateral at Vanguard, Emma Mills, Head of Margin Strategy at Goldman Sachs, and Anna Minetti, Vice President in the Custody Product Manager area at JP Morgan. Custody Product Manager. Now, I am fully convinced after knowing these folks and working with them on this session that if you aren't already automating your collateral release process, these panelists will get you motivated to do so in short form. In addition, we also want to point out, although it's not an area that we at SIFMA AMG or ISDA are very focused on, but we have seen that there are some regulations around telecom communications that may be going away in the future in the US and the UK. So even if you're not sold on counterparty and operational and liquidity risk, your telephone provider may not actually be able to provide you a fax in the coming years. So why don't you come along and get on the Axe the Fax movement earlier rather than later? So first, let's review the challenge. I've hinted at it a little bit, but I'd like Mark and Emma to share their perspective. So Mark will give a buy-side view and Emma will give a sell-side view. So Mark, start us off.
Thank you very much, Amy, and thank you for organizing this. This is an actual topic that has been near and dear to my heart for several years now, and it's caused unneeded stress throughout those years. So I'm all for eliminating it where we can. In order to set the scene a little bit here, I think it's important to understand why you might have a segregated collateral account. 40 Act mutual funds are one area that are not new. It's been around forever. And they require a segregated model. So when we are posting collateral, we being the buy side, are posting collateral out to the sell side, it's required that it's posted into a third-party segregated account. Similarly, now you have uncleared margin rules, initial margin coming into scope, and one of the posting options for segregation is also a very similar third-party segregated account. In those segregated models, you typically have the collateral provider, and in these instances, it's typically the buy side, posting out to the collateral receiver or the secured party being the sell side. And in order to get your collateral back, it's essential that the sell side releases it to you. And typically the way that works is that the sell side has to instruct the custodian of the segregated account to say, we're okay to release X collateral back to the portfolio's main custody account. There's a couple different models, and I think we'll get into those a bit further into this discussion. But it's essential to have that release instruction happen in a timely manner. We're often calling our collateral back because we need it for something else, right? Like either to settle a market trade, a corporate action event, you name it. There's several different reasons why you might recall collateral out of your segregated account. We typically have a very small window to get it back to make sure that we don't have additional issues down the risk chain from us. So I think from a buy side perspective, the more we can get focus on this with the industry to speed up that process, the better. And, there's probably people on here who don't even know what a fax machine is. So it's time for the industry to really move past that. I think one thing it's important to call out is we're not really asking the industry to move into any crazy new technology that nobody's ever heard of before. We're still looking to utilize parts of the infrastructure that have been there for ages. It's just a matter of moving away from the fax. So with that, I'll pass it off to Emma to go on a little bit more about the sell side issues. Thanks.
So at GS, it's a manually intensive and horrendously open to error process. So I'll just describe what it looks like a little bit. A collateral specialist has to type up a Word document, and in that Word document, they have to put all of the settlement details that have been agreed with between the parties to settle the margin call for that day. So any part of that could be typed up incorrectly. So as a result, we have an approval process. So the document then needs to be forwarded to an approver for them to double check. There's no guarantee that they'll catch any mistakes. Then it can be printed off, stand by a fax machine, type in the number, wait for it to send. Sometimes you get a settlement confirmation back to say that it's successfully sent, which is good, as long as you've sent it to the right number. But that whole process takes about 10 minutes in total each time to do that. I know a lot of other firms use eFax and we use e-signatures, that helps. But really to use the fax infrastructure and use those telecom lines, you have to stand by a fax machine and send it that way. And once it's sent, who knows whether it got there or not? So we have first-hand experience of problems where either they've run out of paper on the other end, so they never know that we sent them something. The paper's rolled under the fax machine, it's gone missing. You have no confirmation that it's been picked up and processed on the other side. So it might be sat on the fax machine for a really long time before someone is able to retrieve it and process it. And we've got to bear in mind the market cutoff times. A lot of the time we're sending these things later in the day. It's getting closer to market cutoff times. And we really want to make sure we're minimizing that window to make sure that things are processed as quickly as possible. One of the other problems with faxes is the authorized signatories need to be kept up to date. So there's a list of authorized signatories that are allowed to sign a fax. And often, if people leave the department or leave the firm, those need to be updated. We need to make sure we've got a manageable number in case people are out on holiday or leave that are able to cover that signature process. And during the pandemic, when we were working from home, people didn't have fax machines. We didn't realize that we would have that need. So that kind of brought along its own challenges. And I think, 20 years ago, faxes were considered secure messaging methods. They run on this specific network that couldn't be hacked, a telephone network that was considered safe and secure. But the technology has changed from 20 years ago, and the secure methods that are available are better. And those telecom providers are wanting to digitize their networks. And so potentially they're going to be disappearing completely. So there's many different reasons why we need to be moving away. As I said, eFax solutions, whilst they're readily available, they don't leverage those networks in the same way. And we need to be careful about not leveraging email for this type of kind of safe and secure authenticated communication.
Well, how about you two just put a black cloud over this whole process, but not to dwell on the negative. Jason, you've got some solutions, right? So you've been working on this for quite some time. And I'm going to share via the chat the market practice that folks can access after the call. And if you're listening to this via recording, it will be in the email that was sent to you. But Jason, tell us a little bit about how this came about at ISDA and the market practice that was developed years ago.
Yeah, I was surprised when we were digging through our notes. It was actually 10 years this past October that we started working on this. So iterations, obviously, over the course of years, but really understood early on that we needed global adoption and we needed a lot of adoption across the actors. So when we talk about actors and roles, the secured party, the pledger, the account servicer, and that being whether it's a broker, a hedge fund, a prime broker, as an account servicer or a custodian, making sure that we were getting all the different constituents out there and engaged in this. So we were working across ISDA, but also SMPG globally. ISDA had multiple working groups looking at this. SIFMA AMG was very involved across their collateral working group and their custodian group. So we continued to vet it and we continued to talk through it. But let me talk a bit about market practice and how we typically structure these. We look at, as I mentioned, the actors and the roles and how they interact with each other across the business process. And then what are the messaging options that we could do across those business processes? And is there something that already exists today that we could build formatting recommendations around? So when we were looking at this and working with Swift and others, we talked about the MT ISO messages for the securities as well as the FIN messages for the cash, where you're pledging and you're really recalling the cash and securities back and forth between the seg account. So we tried to define what the business process was with those message types in mind. And we worked through multiple surveys across the constituents, and we realized that there wasn't a consensus. And that happens sometimes with these market practices, that you don't see an overwhelming majority saying, this is how I prefer to do it. So we built the recommendations in the market practice addressing two different models. And you'll see that within the scope that lays it out as how the business process works across those two message models, as well as the field by field recommendations if you're going to use one versus the other. So at least there would be consistency if you're using one model versus the other. I won't talk too much about those two models because I know Anna wants to get into that, but just we'll highlight that there are variations across those two models as well. If you're starting to talk about a middle office provider or a vendor that's sending them on behalf of either the secured party or the pledger that could exist, that are also outlined in that market practice.
So Anna, you'll take us through the two different messaging formats that Jason hinted at, single and dual authorization. Can you review a few details about those?
Absolutely. Thanks, Amy. And I'm going to be mentioning some formatted message types as well. So from a custodial perspective, most custodians are able to accept both workflows. So if a client decides together with the secured party that they both want to control the assets and or cash movements out of the control account, they would set up a dual control authorization model, right? And this would allow our client to send us an MT542 message, for example, for securities, free of payment message to deliver collateral from the control account that would then match to the MT527 released authorization message from the secured party. Most custodians have also built the dual matching capability where if the secured party is unable to send an MT527, both parties can each send the MT542. For example, again, for securities, and those instructions would match as well, allowing the collateral to then be released from the account. So most custodians do have the flexibility here with respect to the release authorization message type, especially since we've noticed that not everyone in the industry has the capability to use the MT527 message at the present time. But if instead both parties want to use or employ a single authorization model on the account where either the pledgor or the secured party is solely responsible for the release of collateral, that could be accommodated as well. And this workflow would only require one party send the MT542 or 202, let's say, if it's a cash message, to release pledges from the account. So simply one message from an authorized party would be sufficient to release collateral. Of course, all of this would need to be documented via the ACA, the account control agreement, so that custodians are aware of the model that needs to be followed. We, of course, are indifferent to whether clients choose single or dual authorization. Most agreements that we negotiate today, though, do contemplate dual authorization. However, keep in mind that generally speaking, this would not be a one-size-fits-all solution. You can have agreements with, certain brokers that allow for a single authorization flow and others that allow for dual. So it's again, not one-size-fits-all. We do understand that there are differences that may need to be accommodated between the parties.
Thank you, Anna. And for those of you who are new to this messaging that may be a little overwhelming of the 527s and the 542s, please do go through the market practice that Elisa had posted. And there's some great visuals that help break this down. Now, John, from
Amy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know you're on a rhythm. I just want to highlight when you first open the document and you see it's 73 pages long. Don't fear. I think you're going to see it broken into sections of exactly what Anna was talking about with the trade instructions recommendations. That in the second phase, we then went back and put status and confirmation messages in, so which are also in there, which adds some length to the document. But it covers both the instructions as well as the status and confirmations.
Very good point, Jason. The length of it should not be intimidating. And there's great visuals in it, right? There's great pictures to show all the actors and how it all works together. So it is some very good content. So for those of you who may not have encountered this before, or just thinking, wow, it sounds like a lot. I've got to get my custodians involved. I've got to get my counterparties involved. But there's some real quantifiable benefits. And John, Vanguard's been working on this for a while. What are some experiences that really are shown as benefits to your firm and also to your counterparties?
Yeah, so we think there are a ton of benefits when it comes to automation, especially for the segregated accounts. So let's just start with purely the operational efficiencies that we can gain with automation. So when I think of these faxes and the impact that it has on our day-to-day operations, I think of settlement fails first. It can be settlements, as Mark was saying, anywhere from substitutions, also just to regular collateral recalls. And how does that impact our operational teams? How does that impact our operations overall? Well, it impacts a lot of teams. And let's start with settlements. So they're monitoring our daily trades, and any exceptions or fails will push them to investigate the cause of the failures. After a lot of investigation, which takes a bunch of time, they'll pass it along to our collateral team, who by then is also investigating it, trying to determine what the cause of the failure. After that investigation, they'll oftentimes have to reach out to the custodians as well as the broker-dealers to identify the cause. There's a number of different ways that these fails can happen, as Emma was alluding to, anywhere from losing the fax to us not sending it correctly. So it does take some investigation and time to look into it. And then also on top of those failures will have impacts to our reconciliations because it might cause issues with cash or security position breaks in our investment book of records. So that introduces a third team, our reconciliations team. So far, we've been talking about it. A single settlement fail has already impacted several teams, both internal and external. So what does this mean for operations? Well, it means taking our crew's time to spend resolving issues that are entirely avoidable. And as they say, time is money, which is why we're so focused on this initiative. We also don't want to take time away from more important initiatives like UMR, which Amy, you'll say, has just begun. It hasn't ended. So we want to continue to look into that. Now, beyond just saving time, which is headcount, as I was alluding to earlier, we also want to reduce settlement fees. And TPMG fees have been around there for quite some time. And in our inability to recall collateral in a timely manner to settle treasury trades, for example, will result in increased fees, reducing fund performance for our clients. Additionally, with the recent launch of CSDR, we're also seeing a whole new swath of fees related to trade failures. This is not even to mention any miscellaneous claims made by counterparties due to other failed trades. Now, those are two, I'd say, more explicit costs, increased headcount, and also fees, but there are also other less explicit costs to our funds due to settlement fails. So let's take security financing. So we might lose out on opportunities with securities lending, repo, and other financing trades. There are also liquidity concerns if we're unable to settle a market trade. If you look back a few months at the gilt crisis, for example, there were situations where a vast amount of collateral needed to be recalled, and filling those trades would not be a pleasant experience, to say the least. Beyond those fees, beyond the risks to securities financing, we also have areas of focus that we're looking at in the future, such as collateral optimization. This is something we've been talking for a while in the industry and just at Vanguard as well. So how do we look at that? Well, it's the next big thing, and it's opportunity for operations to enable front office to implement complex strategies for a collateral program, which also ultimately will generate alpha for our funds. I think we could talk about optimization for a while, and I'm sure we'll have an ISDA webinar one day for this or conference topic. But high level, what are we looking at? It's something as simple as cash for securities, or it could be something like not lending those hard to borrow securities or recalling maybe an equity or fixed income security that is a little bit hard to borrow. And with these collateral optimization strategies, there's going to be a lot more implementation of algorithms that will rapidly suggest substitutions throughout the day for pledged collateral. Now, with these algos firing on all cylinders, there will be a huge increase of movements. So we'll need automation, or else these strategies will need to be shelved. It's going to be a big thing. And as we talk about optimization, it's how do we implement this and enable it operationally? And then lastly, I think kind of the reputational impacts that are less spoken about. Continually failing trades is not something that a risk management group loves, nor does it give your collateral group a great internal or external reputation. I also can say with certainty that our settlements team really isn't happy with any of these failed collateral calls, as it takes up their time as well throughout the day. That's kind of unnecessary. Also, any time of crisis, when a dealer looks to be failing, which is a very big deal, obviously, we want to do everything we can to get our collateral back and avoid something like being on the front of the Wall Street Journal. So that's a big thing for us. Lots of issues out there, a lot of benefits that we want to realize from getting rid of the basically axing the facts. We'll find a theme for this. So we're definitely committed a lot of resources to making sure that's going to happen.
Thank you, John. You covered quite a bit there. Emma, is there anything that John missed that maybe from a dealer's perspective, are there quantifiable benefits that you've already realized with implementing with some counterparties and custodians, or did he cover everything?
I think you pretty much covered it. It's just that kind of transition to real-time transparency on your risk, real-time view on what's going on in the world, so that you can minimize your settlement fails, minimize your being exposed at the end of the day, really kind of minimize any risk in the process at all. And you get that by instant connectivity, safe and secure, guaranteed delivery, all of those things get you kind of the reduction in risk as well as the efficiency gains.
So for those of you who are watching this now, you'll get a recording of it. So you can go through all of what John and Emma had reviewed and look through and say, wow, do I have that challenge? Yes. Okay, this solution that they're talking about can help. Do I have that challenge at the firm? Yes. And so just kind of knock down all of those benefits for your cost benefit analysis presentation. Now, I just want to remind you that we are taking questions. I think earlier I said via the chat functionality. I should have said Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please submit them, and I'll make sure to come back to those towards the end of the call. Why now? Why is now the time for action to implement automation for releasing collateral from segregated accounts? Why didn't it happen when Jason first worked on this? Well, we'll say 9 years ago, because it took a little bit of time to get finished and to get published. And we'll start with Anna, and then we'll go to Emma and Mark and John. So Anna, you're up first. Why now?
Thanks, Amy. I think the question is, why not now? That's what we should be asking ourselves here, right? It's definitely in all of our best interest to automate processes wherever possible, and obviously remove the risks associated with manual intervention. And now we actually have the automation capabilities to be able to do so. One of the key things coming down the road is T+1 settlement timeframe in 2024. And of course, the industry is moving to shorten settlement timeframes in many markets. So there's an expectation that all of us should be prioritizing settlement efficiency. And obviously, faxes are definitely not efficient, right? Especially when the operational process is depending on multiple parties to authorize the transaction. So of course, we've mentioned there are instances when a collateral substitution is required because a client may want to trade a particular security that's pledged. Being able to turn that around quickly would be instrumental in ensuring that trades are settling on a timely basis, right? Especially with T+1 looming right around the corner. With automation, this can happen in near real time, right? As long as all the parties are instructing their portion of the transaction in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Anna. And Emma, you're up next. Why now, or why not now?
It feels like right now we're only 5 minutes away from the next crisis. So we've experienced a few market volatility caused by crisis. There's been kind of Russia-Ukraine, the LDI crisis. Who knows what the next one will be? But that kind of market volatility and market disruption really shines the light on why we need speed and scale in these processes to help us see what our value at risk is early in the day, avoid the settlement fails, firms able to kind of get control over their settlement fails or dispute values accurately reflecting in their systems, so that kind of can be accurately managed, like from a liquidity management perspective during periods of market volatility.
Thank you, Emma. Let's hope the next market crisis is further than 5 minutes away. Or not for quite some time. But I do appreciate that those times really show cracks in the operational factory or the process, right? So Mark, share with us your answer to why not now?
I agree that it is a why not now is the question. I like that better. To me, UMR took the focus for the last several years, right? Like I think we took our foot off the gas with respect to things like axing the facts, like that being one key thing that we probably could have done away with a few years back had we not had to focus on regulations. As John put it, UMR is not over, it's just beginning, but the effort in order to get UMR live is behind us now, right? So we should have some more resources freeing up, whether that be legal resources, if like a one-page amendment needs to be done to your account control agreements in order to allow for additional means of release letters, they should be freeing up a little bit now. And even just the effort from your operations teams to making sure that you can have the different conversations across custody and brokers and internal to put a new model in place. I think everybody should have a little bit more time on their hands now. And probably the other thing to call out here, and John mentioned this as well, but the Treasury Market Practice Group, TMPG, fails charges that are out there. In the US specifically, they are key. And one of those reasons why I mentioned earlier that we have a very tight window to recall our collateral, right? So it's essential that when we are expecting to get our collateral back, whether our portfolio managers have made a decision to sell the piece of asset we have out on collateral, it has to happen immediately. So the more we can reduce the friction, the better. That TMPG piece and the UMR piece that we've now implemented, this problem is growing, it's not shrinking, right? So it's important that we utilize some of these freed up resources, focus on the problem again, and finally put it behind us.
Thank you, Mark. And John?
Yeah, so on top of the TPMG fees, I think the start of CSDR also kind of put a more focus on what are our fees and how do we better track those.
Actually, John, could you just say what CSDR is, just in case folks?
Essentially, those it's a regulation that
what the acronym is. Central
Securities
Depository Reporting, I think.
Yes, that's not my ultimate wheelhouse from a settlements perspective. But
okay, we'll go on. Sorry.
It is a big initiative that got brought in a lot of times. And I spent a lot of time talking about collateral and how it plays into it. But essentially, those fees, there are a lot more fees that are required now for the industry from a settlements failure. So there's a lot of processes that were implemented to track those. And I think there's been a lot more attention to say, hey, well, these are a lot more fees. What about these TPMG fees and the CSDR fees? They're kind of adding up. So that's something leadership on our side is definitely looking more at. Also, just to reiterate what everyone's been said, it's just been too long. Like we've been talking about this forever, and we're sitting here with faxes. And I honestly, selfishly, I just don't want to sign faxes anymore. I'm just kind of getting sick of it. But especially for us, given we're a large 40 Act firm, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but we do have a lot of segregated accounts, and I think we just need to fix it. You know, post UMR, we have more resources that are freed up. And just right now, it's getting that across the line. How do we automate it? Especially when it comes to UMR, we have these new segregated accounts out there. And as I was mentioning earlier, we can't really move on to this collateral optimization. What is the future of collateral when we can't even handle some of these substitutions manually? And they're going to be shooting substitutions back and forth. So that's another big reason. I also think more than ever, firms are really starting to dig in and understand the impact collateral processes have on our funds. So you'll see, as I was mentioning, that increase in optimization, And more, you're seeing news stories that show weaknesses in collateral processes causing systematic issues in the market, the LDI issues, and even issues when it comes to certain hedge funds that might have had a bad process that have caused issues there. So really, it's getting for us, it's increasing the issues, focusing more, something that's going to be on the table of our senior risk leadership, saying how do we stand with our counterparties? How do we stand if there is a big issue, a market disruption event, a large dealer that goes under, and are we prepared for it? So we want to make sure our operations overall has the ability to do the substitutions, has the ability to recall collateral where needed, or else it'll just sit there, and that's going to be a concern if there actually is a large market event.
Thank you, John. Now, Jason, as you were reflecting a bit 10 years ago, where do you see that things have changed? That why not now?
Yeah, I think the big thing now is the ROI on it, right? So every year you go through your prioritization in your budget, you've got limited dollars you can spend, right? If you look at what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years because of these regulations, because of these different initiatives, transformation initiatives, now you have more custodians who have built out the automation. So there's that economies of scale. Now you have more secured parties that are willing to send the 527 or pledgers that are demanding it of you as a custodian. So whether you're a custodian or you're a secured party or you're a pledger, I think you'll see that ROI. You should look at your metrics again, even if you looked at it before and said the volume's not painful enough right now. Every year it's just going to get worse, and there's an opportunity to look at, see if there's cost savings there and what that ROI would be on the build.
I do remember a conversation you and I had, I think it was about 6 years ago when we were at a conference, and you had specifically said that it's not painful enough. But now I think everyone can say it is painful enough. And you weren't speaking for a specific firm, but although we didn't get any questions, I got another point of view to add about, why not now? And this is from one of our members, said, it's also worth noting that in addition to the other considerations, paper record keeping is also discouraged for many reasons. So if you have to store the paper faxes and or scan them into some system, manage retention or report them to regulators, that also adds to burdens along with all the other costs mentioned. So another item to add into your cost benefit analysis is your record retention on those faxes coming out of the machines.
And Amy, I think it's also worth noting that, the way we get across and we really axe the facts is by all kind of moving at the same time. So I think given, we're talking about resources, but it's not only for the asset managers, it's for the dealers, it's for the custodians. So it's something that we can all really focus on. We can develop the subject matter expertise around it. We can start the communication, as we'll talk a little bit about how to best approach it. But I think it's the industry as a whole is in a great opportunity to just push this through. And maybe it's like kind of a cultural thing. We still like faxes. I don't know, but I think it's time to just kind of break that and just say, let's all do it at the same time and push it across the line.
We all can have a much more, a bigger effect if we join forces, right?
Exactly.
So John and Emma, you've been through this, but it hasn't been easy. What are some hangups or some challenges? And I know Mark and I think Anna had mentioned about the account control agreement. So we don't want to lose sight that there is a documentation and an operation/IT element here. But what are some kind of lessons learned or pain and agony you felt that you don't want others to experience? So we'll go with Emma first.
Yeah, definitely, you need to get that program prioritized. You need to get the cost benefit analysis out there. People bought into it. All of the points that have been raised today hopefully will help firms do that. But with the scale is there because of UMR. UMR's helped us, and so the scale is there to be leveraged now where it wasn't before. What we are challenged with is where you've got existing ACAs and you've got existing legacy documents with some of them have got very legacy wording in them that specifically say that has to be sent via fax. That can be quite hard to uplift. So that needs a bit of attention on making sure that what is worded in your existing legacy documentation can be leveraged for new means of communication. And sometimes it can be, and sometimes it needs to be reworded. And sometimes rewording it can be as simple as a side letter saying, it says facts in the doc, now it will be Swift or whatever the method of communication is. And sometimes it's a bit more complex than that, in that it could be, as we've seen examples of side letters at the GS legal entity level, for example, so multiple side letters. Or we've seen actual custodians asking for each account control agreement to be uplifted individually, where that wording is specifically just saying facts. So we just need to be wary of what is the themes around uplifting of documentation and the effort involved in that. And then once that's done, the kind of onboarding, the upgrading of the account so that they can leverage the new digital messaging. But it's just a coordination effort. It's a project, and it's one that's definitely worth it once you've got a handle and buy-in to the return on investment.
Thank you, Emma. And John, from your perspective, what have been some challenges that you have started to overcome or have overcome?
Yeah, so I think there's been a lot of lessons learned so far with this initiative, but I do feel like we're making pretty good progress. Hopefully, us reaching out to every broker dealer we know about this topic will help everyone, at least on the asset management side. But let's just start kind of with the first step and just kind of walk through how we've been approaching it. So first for us was finding the right person, people or group of the custodians and broker dealers to talk about automation, right? Asset managers will normally have contacts at the broker dealer's operations group, but most of the time that's not the right group to go to work on this sort of initiative. Instead, you'll want to find, maybe it's the IT group, maybe it's the durable product team, or even the product owner to start the conversation. So that took some time. For some broker dealers, it depends. We also found the custodians a little bit easier to engage, just because they can get us to the right contacts right away. But I might be a little bit more biased because we don't use as many custodians. We actually use pretty few compared to the rest of the industry, compared to the size of the broker dealers we work with. Also, once you have the right contact, the conversations around the initiative can be quite technical. So it is important to have someone on the line who's experienced with, Swift, we've been talking about a little bit about, and the workflows that generate them in the collateral management tool. In our experiences with our own collateral system, we find that while the collateral workflows are highly customizable, they can become quickly complex. So let's move we've identified the right people. So let's just talk about the models and the discussions around them. We've seen a fair amount of confusion with them, mainly between both the brokers, dealers, and the custodians, more so the broker dealers, because this is going to be fairly new, which is completely understandable as the models are, as I was mentioning, brand new for many. So it often becomes an educational exercise, walking them through the models at a high level or getting into the nitty gritty when it comes to the ISDA document, which was shared by Amy. One thing when we've come across with education is, what is the best model, right? So we have these conversations with the broker dealers and the custodians. And I think that's kind of challenging with this. There's no we're going to move here, we're going to move there. And I think that a lot of ambiguity comes up. But we find that, there might be an answer somewhere out there to that question. In our opinion, the better discussion is around which is the easier model to implement, which will depend on the technology and system capabilities of all parties. Now, Anna did mention most custodians we found to be the case will support both models. But from a dealer side or asset manager side, if one or both of the models are not supported by a vendor or collateral system, it is really important that they go to the vendor or system or IT, whoever develops and owns that system, for an enhancement as soon as possible. Now, obviously, other models we've talked around how Swift integrates to them, but it is actually surprising, and it is important to dig into this dealer Swift capabilities. You would think that most broker dealers would support Swift, but that's not the case. It tends to be mainly with the smaller brokers. But if they do not, then we aren't making any progress on this, right? So that the whole goal of automation isn't attainable, but it is a great opportunity to start that conversation of how they're going to whether get a system or start using electronic messaging in the Swift format to move collateral. So that's something that's come along. And then to reiterate a point I had earlier, if one asset manager is having the conversation, it might not get anywhere with the broker dealer. But if many asset managers are reaching out, then we will get some more traction. So now is better than ever to have that conversation. Now, even if the dealer supports Swift or the asset manager or custodian, they may still have the challenge of not being able to support the workflows to generate the Swifts with either the right data or in an automated manner. So, for example, MT527s might be supported for a tri-party model, which is very common with the dealers, but not the third-party model. Same goes for the other model and the required Swift. So it's something that they'll have to talk to their vendor, that they'll have to understand what are the system restraints that I have and how do I get past those. Now, lastly, this is something that I think we've been really good at, and thank my project manager out there, is tracking progress for the initiative. So there's a ton going on. We have lots of stakeholders that we need to manage, primarily operations at the broker-dealers and custodians, but that could be a huge number. It is also worth considering that we'll need to enable every broker-dealer and custodian combination to be live on this. And also, as excuse me, Emma was mentioning, we'll have to dig into every single one of those ACAs, which now are bringing in a legal team at the custodians and for the asset managers. And that might mean amendments, which is a lot of work. So it's going to be a big lift, working with the legal teams at custodians, working with internally. So we have everything down. We've chosen the model. We've walked through the process. We have the technology to go live, but now we actually have to get there. So you're going to have to track and implement all of those. For us personally, we have thousands of collateral accounts, thousands and thousands of agreements. So it's going to take a while. So just having that ability to track what is the setup, where we stand with the broker dealers, with the custodians is going to be necessary. So overall, I've kind of talked through a lot of these lessons learned. Hopefully some will stick, but I really focus on 3 areas: communication, education, and project management. This isn't going to be the easiest thing, but it will be worth it in the end. And I think if we all start moving along, especially at the same time, we will be able to reiterate acts of fact.
Thank you, John. I don't have any additional questions, although someone had sent me an email off to the side or a message off to the side. I'll get back to you directly. But now's the opportunity to talk about next steps. So I've asked each one of the panelists to cover just briefly what you think is the most important next step. So Jason, you're up first.
Yeah, I think John hit on it well. The importance of prioritizing the project team. You're going to have to work across your client service teams, across your legal teams. So getting that and making it a priority across the company, I think is important. There's a lot of documentation out there. We've talked about the market practice. There's these onboarding checklists that help you navigate some of the things that maybe you haven't thought of, like a third-party consent form or an ACA document that needs to be signed with your account servicer. So between the different industry associations, I think we all know each other pretty well, that we can point you to where the documents are stored on different websites if you need help. But obviously, the panelists here representing all the different actors in the model, I think we'd all be happy to help too and see the adoption happen. So
that's right. So if you do need a contact at your dealer or your custodian, between Elisa and I, we can certainly help. Again, not vendors or commercial endeavors, but if you need to get to the right person at a specific custodian, especially, we can help with that. Anna, what is your tip for folks?
So again, clients should be reaching out to their custodians directly, right? Confirming the approach they want to take with their secured parties. First and foremost, everyone's mentioned the client documentation, right? The ACA, it has to be reviewed and updated accordingly to allow for the electronic instructions. And this can either be done via an amendment or a side letter, as we've mentioned. Custodians really want to make this as efficient as possible, because as you can imagine, there are going to be thousands of accounts that we'll all be looking to automate, right? But custodians will take a different approach, right? Not everyone does this the same way. So it's imperative that you speak to each of the custodians separately and not assume that everyone's following the same process for that, right? Our clients should also be working closely with their brokers to determine what automation capabilities they do have. And prioritize those changes on a broker by broker basis. So if a broker is ready, move forward with that broker and automate, and not wait for, some of the other brokers, right, to catch up. And additionally, if you want to make changes to the dual single authorization model, right, we're reviewing the contracts now. So this is the time for you to also make changes there if you feel that that's what you want to do.
Thank you, Anna. And Mark, you're up. Oh, Emma, you're up next. Sorry, Emma.
Yeah, I think just in parallel, it's really important to have the conversation with the custodian and the dealer in parallel, because you're going to have to know what type of methods the dealer supports, if they're automated already, if they prefer dual or single, and marry up that conversation with custodian capabilities and make sure it kind of all happens together. So you're going to need, as Jason said as well, to involve kind of legal teams, probably counterparty risk teams if there's renegotiation of documents. So just really at the beginning, getting the buy-in, everybody agreeing that it's worth doing, and then project managing it through all of the important conversations. And you don't want to stop. You want to work through it all together. So whatever the best method is for marrying a custodian and a dealer and onboarding and doing it in the most efficient way. And, however we can help, as you said.
Thank you, Emma. And Mark, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I think from a buy-side perspective, the area you need to worry about the most is your technology provider. This is a great opportunity for me to take a shameless plug for the Aladdin platform. We have the capability to send a dual-sided SWIFT message. So you book one transaction and we can message both our main custody account and the segregated account. You need to think about messaging that segregated account from the buy-side perspective. It depends on the model. You might not need it depending if you choose single versus a dual release model. But in the event you have a dual or even a single where the buy side is the one making that call, you need to ensure you can make that messaging happen. So as you're in those conversations with your custodians and your brokers, don't forget about your technology and making sure that you can send the right messages to your custody accounts as needed. And bring your technology provider along for those conversations to ensure you don't get to the end of the conversations and the negotiations for account control agreements and things, and then realize you can't fulfill your end of the bargain. So I think that's where I would focus on, making sure that you are bringing your technology provider. One additional thing to call out here, we've been talking a lot about SWIFT. There are other options out there, right? It's important to move away from fax, but some custodians offer portals that you can access to do release letters. You can use fixed messaging, SFTP files. There's other ways to get around the fax machine. So I think it's important to call out other options. If you can't, or for some reason do a SWIFT 527, there's still other options. So just have the conversations.
Thank you, Mark. And I think that is important just to remind folks that neither SIFMA, AMG, nor ISDA endorse or recommend any specific vendor or commercial endeavor, but we do want you all to stop using faxes. That is across the board, absolute. And we're not, I don't want to say we're anti-fax machine, but we kind of are. We really are. So I just want to thank all of the panelists again for participating today and being such enthusiastic spokespeople for this topic. Remind folks to please access the ISDA market practice and review that. Speak with your custodians, with your brokers, with your counterparties, or your buy-side firms, depending on which firm type you represent. And if you do need help with a contact at a specific custodian, Elisa and I can get you to the right people. If you should start with your relationship manager, but sometimes even still, they might not know the right person on this project, and we have those names for all the major custodians. So on behalf of ISDA and SIFMA AMG, we thank you all for joining the Axe the Facts movement. And again, we'll have this on a recorded version, just in case you loved it so much you want to listen to it again, or if you want to send it along to your fellow ISDA or SIFMA AMG members. So thank you all. Have a great day.